Salutare tuturor, sunt Andrei Radu, bun venit la ePlan. Astăzi vorbim despre psihologia dezamăgirii și cum afectează aceasta comportamentul utilizatorilor, dar și despre optimizarea ratei de conversie în magazinele online în contextul evoluției AI. Îl am alături de mine pe Michael Aagaard, unul dintre cei mai cunoscuți experți în CRO, optimizarea ratei de conversie, asta înseamnă, la nivel internațional. Hello Michael, good morning.
Good morning.
Happy to have you here. How was your flight?
Very pleasant. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so Michael, you will be talking at the GPEC Summit very soon about the psychology of disappointment. So let's explain this concept a bit and how it affects, the users and their behavior.
Yes. Well, disappointment is a fascinating topic that I became a little bit obsessed with and started researching. And the interesting thing is all of us experience disappointment. We all intuitively know that it's not a good thing. Like if someone says something was disappointing, we right away know it's bad. Like no one has ever said, it was such a great experience, I was so disappointed.
Exactly.
That sounds crazy. But at the same time, we seem to overlook how important it is, how big of a role it plays in our lives in general, and not least online, because it turns out that it's part of our psychology and our physiology, and it affects how we learn, how we remember, how we behave, and so on, and not least online. So what I started looking at was more the science of how it actually affects our behavior. So a way of thinking about disappointment is you can look at it as the emotional pain you experience when your expectation of reality does not live up to your experience of reality, when there's a gap between the two.
When there is a gap between, okay.
Yes, exactly. And then it's kind of a thing we have from evolution, because it's a way of essentially optimizing our behavior. So we're simplifying something very complicated here. Essentially what it is when we think we're going to have a good outcome, right? And then we don't have a good outcome, then we have the emotional pain of disappointment to help us avoid doing that in the future. So it impacts us, it feels terrible.
Frustrating maybe. Okay.
Yeah, frustrating, many different, annoyed, many different negative emotions. The main thing is it's a pain that we remember, because then the next time we're in a similar situation, that pain will come back, and then we'll go like, oh no, I shouldn't do that, right? So then we're getting to the point of why it's important then to think of this, for example, in online experiences, because if someone has a bad experience with your brand, there's a very high likelihood that they will not come back to you. And then, of course, it can be a small emotional pain, or it can be, a large
huge one.
Exactly. And the larger, the more detrimental to your brand it will be. And then you could say also that if today there's a lot of competition between brands and sites and so on, and then you can say if you are not like unique, completely unique, then the main thing you have to be competitive on is, for example, the user experience and the customer experience and so on. And by not disappointing, your customers and so on, that's one of the ways you can win in the long term.
Okay, so you said about this gap, between the likelihood of disappointment. Are there any strategies, to reduce this gap that you should focus on as an online business?
Oh yeah. So one of the things that is fascinating about this also is that, like, there's no amount of disappointment that feels good, right? Any disappointment feels bad. And the thing that I found out is that it takes very little disappointment for someone to get really angry or upset. I did some original research on it and asking people about different disappointing situations.
And do you have some examples?
Yeah. So one of the things I just realized was even something as small as being annoyed over. Well, okay, so a quote from my study was, someone said, I'm still upset about this experience 2 years later. Like, they're still frustrated, and they were describing an experience with, bad or a bad user experience with some accounting software, right? But that was enough emotional impact that 2 years later they're still frustrated about it. So that goes back to the whole, kind of evolutionary aspect of disappointment. It's so ingrained in us that when we feel today because we inherited it from essentially being in a life or death situation. So disappointment kind of meant it's bad for your survival. So that is still in us. So when we have a bad experience, we feel disappointment, we react very, very heavily to it. But typically what I see is people have expectations that when you do something online, it's going to be easy, it's going to be fast, it's going to be a lot more effective than if you were to do it in the real world. So those are, some of the main things. So
Three pillars.
Exactly. And so if you do not live up to those things, people get frustrated. But typically it could be something like a really bad user experience where people get frustrated because it was supposed to be easy and it's not, and they have to do all the work. It could be something like hidden fees, for example. I see that a lot. People get really angry about that because you have a clear expectation about the price and what's going to happen. And then, for example, on the last step of the checkout, it's like, oh, we forgot to mention the $20 for, whatever.
Yeah.
People get really
extra,
angry.
okay.
Yeah, and people get really upset about that, and then that could be a very classic example of people then abandoning, the site after that. And then another thing I see, for example, is poor customer service. And the interesting thing there is when you contact customer support or customer service, you're already frustrated, right? Yep. Because you're contacting them because you have a problem. So if they don't help you, then you're like even more angry. And also because you try to have that personal interaction, it has a tendency to make it even worse. So I would say one of the first steps is to be cognizant of, where in the funnel, for example, where in the experience you could be disappointing your users, and then taking it very, very seriously. And then I think we have a tendency sometimes to think, well, that's just slightly annoying, when maybe it's actually really disappointing. And the difference is something that's slightly annoying is just like a momentary irritation that disappears again. Disappointment lingers, like you don't forget it. So there's a big difference there.
So how can you tell what is the most important part of your business that you should take care of because it frustrates people or it angers them?
Well, I mean, there's multiple different approaches you could use. A couple of them would be, one very, very simple way would be, for example, talking to your representatives from, customer support or customer success.
Okay.
Like, they spend every single day, all day, speaking to customers. So they have experience from hundreds or maybe thousands of user interactions.
Okay.
So they just have a deep wealth of knowledge. So interviewing them, asking them, about what are the main problems people encounter, what are the main questions they have, and so on, can be a very, very effective
And also user surveys.
User surveys, definitely talking to the users themselves. The interesting thing about talking to stakeholders is often they have accumulated knowledge, from having, again, maybe thousands of touch points. Another thing that I think is really interesting, I've been using a lot, is analyzing reviews, for example, customer reviews or product reviews. So that can take a long time reading all that, but it's a very interesting way of delving in and really understanding motivations and barriers and so on. And especially if you look at negative reviews,
yep,
that's where people are usually disappointed and really angry. Then you can pick up on a lot of stuff there, for example. And then of course, you could use things like session recordings and so on to try. Often you can pick up on places where people get frustrated or stuck.
Yep.
Another.
There are some tools.
Yes. Another very simple one I could mention is running a little survey, a very simple one-question survey after the checkout, where you say, was there something that almost stopped you from buying today? And the idea there is...
So just one question.
Yes,
okay.
one question. Was there something that almost stopped you from buying today? And the idea is that the people who left, got really frustrated or disappointed, they're gone. We can't talk to them. So the next best thing is the people who actually then went through the whole process, even though it might have been frustrated, we can ask them and get some clues there.
Okay. Regarding the CRO, because you are an expert in CRO for many, many years, how is AI, included in CRO right now, and how can it help?
Well, I mean, there's so much happening right now, and I'm by no means an AI expert, but I've been using it in my own work and trying to understand and so on. So I think one of the main things is it's going to be I guess every aspect of our lives AI is going to play a role in. So I think the only right thing is to start learning about it and understanding it now and how to use it. I think people have a tendency to be very extreme. Like either people are like, this is useless, I hate it, or it's like, this is the solution to everything. And I think there's a balance.
Holy grail.
There. Yes, I think there's a balance there. Personally, the way I've been using it is for some of the stuff that would take me a very, very long time to do. So for example, I mentioned product or customer reviews. So reading 1,000 reviews is going to take you a very long time. So I find that ChatGPT, for example, can be very helpful there because you can, upload a document with 2,000 reviews, and then you can start chatting. You can start chatting with it, like ask for the themes and so on. And then you could argue, well, that's not as good as reading all the reviews yourself. And I say, sure, that's true. But if it's going to take me 20 hours to analyze it manually, and I could do it in half an hour with ChatGPT, then I'm willing, to have that little quality drop there because it's so much more effective. And with qualitative research, often that is the barrier, is people don't have enough time or resources to do it. And then another thing I've been using AI for that I think is really, really practical is kind of a creative sidekick, you could say. Like, for example, for copywriting, I never have AI do any finished copy for me, but I use it as a sparring partner, you could say. So I might write something for a client, for example, and for a landing page or something, and then I'll ask ChatGPT, for example, can you shorten this down? Or I wrote this paragraph here, can you turn that into 3 bullet points? Or I upload, for example, reviews, a bunch of reviews, and then based on that, I'll ask it to write a headline, for example, or something. I never really end up using that as the final, but it just is a great way of coming up with
suggestions, ideas, and so on.
Exactly, just a bunch of stuff that otherwise would take me a long time to do. So I feel that it can really kickstart my creative process. And then, of course, there's lots happening with analytics tools and all kinds of stuff, and split testing tools and so on, where AI can just help make all that a lot easier.
Okay, so those are the benefits, but what are the limitations, of AI in CRO, of using AI in CRO?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of limitations, I would say, but for example, one of them would be if you rely. Well, it's always evolving, and tomorrow is going to be better than today, and so on. But currently, one of the big mistakes I think would be to simply auto-generate content through AI, because it's essentially drawing on what's out there right now. So there's a tendency that it can be somewhat generic what it pumps out. So I think there's we have to be careful that we're not, that it's not just AIs marketing to AIs essentially, right? We have to remember the human element, or that on LinkedIn, for example, it's just like, one post after the other that's not written by humans. So the whole thing becomes robots essentially. So I think there's some serious limitations there, and I think that's the main thing, is really remembering the human aspect and remembering that we're still communicating marketing with humans.
With humans.
Yeah.
But are you scared of AI and the Terminator coming to us?
I don't know. It's such a huge topic, and there's so many different outcomes, and it's in many ways it's so overwhelming that, I mean, I think there certainly is a future.
Can be a menace. Okay.
Yeah, I think there is a future where it's not beneficial. So I guess it goes back to ethics and being a bit careful what we use it for. I'm not one of those people who's sure that we're going to hell now. Okay. But I think we have to. But I think we have to be careful.
Yeah, it is a possibility. Okay, so
I think so. Yeah, I do think so.
Okay. But despite AI and technology, are there any classic user research methods, that are still valid in a CRO strategy right now?
Well, yes, I definitely think so, and all of them, essentially, I would say. And I think there is a tendency with technology and so on that we kind of often forget about the basics and then jump straight to the latest thing. And forget about the classic stuff, the really foundational aspects. So, things like user testing, for example, like you still can't do that with AI. I mean, you can of course maybe do a website audit where it uses some heuristics to point out some points, but it's nothing compared to having real humans, for example, doing a classic user test on your website or your app. So that is still extremely important. Customer interviews, talking to your actual customers, really understand their motivations and barriers and so on. Speaking, to the people in sales, who really understand how to sell to your customers and so on. All of that is extremely important. And also just understanding, psychology, like we started with, talking about things like disappointment, motivation, and so on, and cognitive biases and all these things. Really understanding how, humans work as far as how we make decisions and so on. And, I think if that becomes lost, well, then it becomes very, very difficult actually to optimize things, because then we don't really understand the purpose of what we're trying to do, really. So, yeah, all of that is really, really important. In a way, I guess you could say it's more important than ever, because it's becoming so much easier to do things automatically.
Yep.
That, I think some of all this stuff is just kind of becoming forgotten.
Yeah. And you will be the specialist, again, the human specialist.
Yes, yeah. Very much so.
But as a business, when you conduct usability testing and so on, what are the most important outcomes that you should focus on? What do you seek to find, Like, what do I want from usability testing?
Well, multiple different layers, but not just usability testing. I think in all the qualitative, and quantitative research, essentially, it's really about understanding the experience from the perspective of the users, of the customers. We have a tendency to see the world through our own perspective, and I think as marketers or whatever, the people building the experience, we have so much background knowledge. We understand why we built the checkout like we did, or why we're asking for this information, or why we're adding this fee here, or so on. And then sometimes we forget that the users don't know any of that. To them, it's not logical at all, And so it just helps us understand the world through our customers, so that we can, essentially sell to them the way they want to buy. Give them good experiences. I think that's also the ethical way of doing it. One of the things about, for example, user testing or watching recordings or whatever is, it's impactful when you have that experience where, it's like, the button is right there. It's right there in the corner. Just click it.
Just click it.
Exactly.
Okay. But the user doesn't see it.
Exactly. And then, and then developing that empathy where you could have a tendency to think they're stupid because they couldn't find it because you designed it so beautifully. But that's probably not the right way to look at it. The right way to look at it is say, okay, we didn't do a good enough job since they can't figure it out. So to me, the research part of CRO is so important, and it's the detective work. You have a puzzle, and we have some of the pieces. A lot of the pieces are missing, so we're trying to find those pieces so we can make complete
a complete image.
Yeah, exactly.
From your experience, what are the most common mistakes that people tend to make, business people, marketers, and so on, when they're trying to optimize conversions?
Well, I think there's a lot of mistakes competing for the first place.
For the first place,
yeah.
Okay.
But I would say one of the very fundamental things is, random optimization without any kind of...
Without research.
Yeah, without, you're trying to, essentially, often we're trying to solve a problem we don't understand. And so I think often we just sit down like a bunch of marketers and like, oh, so how do we make this site better? Oh, I have an idea. And well, we might be right, but it's more or less random at this point. So I see CRO as a process where we can make better business decisions through research, validation, and experimentation. So the other part that I think is important is not just and that is also a mistake, is just launching things because our marketer's logic tells us this is so much better than before. So running experiments, if you have enough traffic as A/B tests, or making sure that you are comparing, that you actually can get some data back and verify, was this the right thing to do? Did it make the business better? Is also very, very important. So we're constantly validating whether we're moving in the right direction, and we're constantly learning and actually optimizing, because without that, it's not really optimization because we don't know. We're just kind of crossing our fingers and hoping.
Of course.
Yeah.
Is there a specific moment in business when you should start doing A/B testing, you know, and user testing and so on? Because I assume when you're a startup and you have very few traffic, this is not very relevant.
Well, no, and that's why the research part is so important, because it's always important to understand your customers, right? So, I mean, the whole research part from day one, and of course before you launch your business and so on. And then as far as the A/B testing part, well, that's when you have the volume, the traffic to actually be able to do it. And what is that volume? Well, that's kind of depends on what you're trying to do, the statistics behind it. But you're looking at, you know, there's kind of a rule of thumb where you say if you have like 1,000 conversions, like a
thousand conversions, okay.
1,000 sales, then you
1,000 sales per month, per day?
Yeah, per month. Then you're starting to have a sample that's large enough that you can actually get results within, you know, a reasonable amount of time. Because the other thing is, if we want to be effective with our experimentation and so on, then having to run experiments for more than a month is going to slow down that process quite a bit, because then you're waiting a very long time to get results. And you're probably tempted to stop the test before they conclude, and then, you know, you're making bad decisions. And that's where I think A/B testing becomes dangerous, is if you don't, for example, understand the statistics behind, and you're making decisions early, so you're calling a test with a false positive, so you think it actually performed better, when in reality it didn't, it underperformed. Yep. But you stop the test early, so you're actually implementing something that's but you're thinking it's better, which is a very, very bad business strategy, right? That you're really shooting yourself in both feet. So I would say there's a lot of hype around A/B testing, and like a lot of people saying everybody should A/B test and so on, which is not the case. It is one out of many tools you can use, and, you know, optimization zero is not synonymous with A/B testing. You know, so use it when it's helpful, and when it's not helpful, we don't. Research is always helpful.
Okay. Are there any important or relevant trends that we should know of for this year? And I'm talking about e-commerce businesses, about online shops. Is there something that will change this year, except AI, because it's developing and growing rapidly? Is there something else regarding, I don't know, maybe SEO things? Because we were talking about voice search like 10 years ago. It didn't happen. But on the other hand, Google somehow makes a switch from his, you know, keyword-based search to, you know, to AI. So is there something that will impact the e-commerce businesses?
I don't know a lot about SEO, but there's, I mean, with the little I know about what Google is doing right now, there's going to be...
Just your opinion.
Well, there's going to be some massive changes, I think, as far as that. And then you said not AI, but I'll talk about AI anyways.
Because this is the buzzword.
Yeah, but one of the things I'm noticing with my own behavior is that I am using search engines less and less. Okay. Because with a lot of things, I feel like I'm getting better answers from ChatGPT, for example. Okay, so ChatGPT can, overcome Google at some point. Well, I think so. I mean, for me, it essentially already has. As far as when I'm in the knowledge gathering phase, you could say, then I go to ChatGPT, because I can get much more detailed answers. You know, if I'm this is maybe a weird example, but I do a lot of wildlife photography. I take photos of animals and so on. And so the property I live on, we're out in the country. We have like 10 acres, and I'm very fascinated by falcons. So I set up a nest box for kestrels, little falcons, right? And so they moved in the spring, and I was very excited, and then all of a sudden they disappeared, right? And I didn't understand why. I was disappointed, I was frustrated. And so trying to Google that, this is a very, very specific question I'm asking. It was very difficult for me to find any answers, because I would have to dig through like so much literature to actually find that specific answer. If I was doing it through Google. Through ChatGPT, I ask it, I'm having a conversation, I say, hey, I put up the box, then the kestrels moved in, yada, 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 now they moved out, what are some of the reasons? And then, instantly I get an in-depth explanation of what the reasons could be. right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's a completely different experience, you know. Or for example, flying in yesterday, I was like, oh, what is the etiquette around tipping in Romania? I could ask Google, but then I'm going to go through, I don't know, some generic articles or something, and so ChatGPT, and then I can just ask it follow-up questions. So I mean, that seems to be a fundamental shift. And then another thing with e-commerce, I think that one of the main things is just there's so much competition, and you know, everything is getting more expensive as far as advertising. And
Yes, indeed.
for example, in Denmark, there are some huge competitors from China who are just destroying everything.
In Romania also.
Based on prices and so on. So what are your competitive advantages there? You know, again, going back to disappointment and the user experience, I've had very disappointing experiences with some of the Chinese companies.
Yes,
you know,
and you are not the only one.
No, exactly. So I think there's some things there we really have to. There's an opportunity there, you know, to compete and so on. So I think that's some of the stuff that's really important to understand. But then that also goes back to CRO and optimizing the user experience, right? Because again, that's a competitive parameter. If we can give them a better experience, and you know, give them better support, you know, and you know,
Yep.
as far as returns and all that stuff, that's some of the things I'd be focusing
Is it
on.
okay to use ChatGPT for describing the products in your online shop? You know, to make the description of the product,
Yeah, I mean, you can
like suggestions. And so on.
yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, there's also a way you can do a template for it. I mean, you know, you can. Depends on how different the products are, so on. But for a lot of that, is going to be repetitive writing tasks where I think it would be great to use ChatGPT. You know, then just you can customize it for the individual products. But there's going to be things that are generic enough that I think that would be an advantage.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. It was a pleasure having you at ePlan. Can't wait to see you on stage at GPEC Summit.
Yes, thank you so
very
much for having me. I'm looking forward to tomorrow.
Vă mulțumesc și vouă că ne-ați urmărit. Sunt Andrei Radu. Până data viitoare, stay digital!